Nathan Guy.
It's been interesting to hear the debate this morning, and I think it's worthy that I make a contribution at this stage. Importantly, I've had 18 months in this role, and there's real synergies between the three departments. And we've heard a lot of political rhetoric, and I want to address that this morning, because there's a real strong focus with these three departments, the Department of Internal Affairs, the National Library and Archives New Zealand, to get more information online and more accessible to every New Zealander. And just this week, the government announced all those communities that are going to benefit from the $1.5 billion of ultra-fast broadband, the rollout of that, which is really positive. And in particular, focusing on Part 2, which involves the National Library. It has a wealth of material online. Journals from Parliament now are online, dating back to 1860s. Now, this bill, the changes to it are very minimal and technical. And it preserves the cultural and important institutional capability of both of these departments. And it's interesting, Steve Chadwick interjects that it doesn't. And what I'd like to ask Steve Chadwick is, why in the 9 years didn't the Labor government address the terrible issues to do with the National Library with its leaking roof? It took this government to come in and invest $52 million, because in the first couple of weeks when I was the Minister, I went for a tour of the National Library, and here was a hose pipe coming out of the roof into the bucket. So here we have the previous Labor government now banging on in the committee stage of the House about the importance of these cultural institutions. They did nothing in the 9 years when they were awash with cash in terms of fixing up the library so that it had a decent roof on it, so that these important collections like the Alexander Turnbull wouldn't rot. And this government has made a very valuable contribution over the road to the important rejuvenation project of the National Library. The other thing that's really important is that in this budget we've been able to roll out $12.6 million into a digital archive, and that's new money, and that is really, really important and been very well received by the sector. The other thing that's worth noting is that Mr Robertson in his address talked about that the savings could only be around $165,000 per year. And in actual fact, looking at the out years, the information that I've got is that the savings will be up around $1.5 million per year. So once again, I'm not sure where Mr Robertson gets his comments from. The other important point, and I've heard quite a bit of rhetoric today about third tier, and it's important to realise that existing in the Department of Internal Affairs, an example of a third tier manager that employs 205 people is the person that's in charge of the passport operation. So they employ 205 people. They create and generate third-party revenues of around $55 million. And of course, the performance of the New Zealand passports and visa-free status across 50 countries means that there's a classic example of someone that's performing in a third-tier role and doing very, very well and has the support of the New Zealand public. So the other important point that I wanted to make was that Mr Robertson he quoted in favour of combining back office functions and cost savings. And that is very, very important. I'm pleased that Mr Robertson agrees with the thrust of this bill, and he's publicly stated in the House today that you do support combining back office functions and cost savings, which is great. And the other important thing is that Mr. Chair.
I call the Honourable Nathan Guy.
Mr. Chair, Mrs. Chadwick talked about becoming a super ministry, and yet, when Mr. Robertson was publicly out there in March saying, there was going to be this big culture of combined Department of Information, he was saying, "Oh no, that's way too radical." And now, on the other hand, we've got him saying that we shouldn't be touching it at all. So I think there's quite a bit of confusion on that side of the House, because on one hand they're saying what Stevie Chadwick was proposing before would have been way too radical, and now on the other hand we're saying that the opponents to this are saying that shouldn't be touching these important cultural institutions at all. So I look forward to hearing more about the debate on this bill. I think it's appropriate while I'm on my feet, because no one has talked about the Crown Law opinion that was released following the waiving of legal privilege by the Attorney General. And I want to thank the Attorney General for releasing that, because let's put the facts out on the table, because I'm interested to hear from our opponents about them negating this important Crown Law opinion. So it states, in our opinion, this is Crown Law, preserves the current statutory purposes of the National Library and Archives New Zealand. Crown Law said that. It makes no change to the current level of statutory independence enjoyed by the National Librarian. No change. Increases the level of statutory independence enjoyed by the Chief Archivist. And it goes on to say, it's publicly available, goes on to say that the Chief Archivist and the National Librarian are carrying out their roles and functions independently, to the extent that those roles are legally required to be carried out independently. That's right. It would not be lawful for the Chief Executive of the Department of Internal Affairs to interfere with the Chief Archivist and National Librarian's performance of their statutory duties. It also preserves the role and function of the Alexander Turnbull Library as set out in the current legislation. It preserves the role and function of the statutory advisory groups prescribed by the National Library Act and Public Records Act, which carry on. The National Library of New Zealand Te Puna Matarangi o Aotearoa Act of 2003 and the Public Records Act of 2005 carry on, that the National Party supported. So, in short, this Crown Law opinion says that the changes to the National Library Act and the Public Records Act seem entirely limited to dealing with the fact that the National Library and Archives New Zealand would cease to be separate departments of the Crown and would become the Department of Internal Affairs. A very powerful Crown Law opinion, and I look forward to those opposite trying to negate this.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
The Minister has been quoting at some length from an official document that he quite clearly has, and I request that he table it.
Speaking to the point of order,
Mr. Chair, in responding to the comments made from across the other side of the House, the Minister, within his speech, made it clear that it was a public document in the public domain, and in that regard, there's no need for him to table it.
I'll take Grant Robertson.
Mr. Chair, as far as I'm aware, that's the point made by the opposition Chief Whip's wholly irrelevant. If the Minister is quoting from an official document in this House, he needs to table it. That's what the standing orders say.
The Standing Order 367 says whenever a Minister quotes from a document relating to public affairs, a member may, on a point of order, require the Minister to table the document. The Minister must then table the document unless it is of a confidential nature. It's publicly available. Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Chair, you've